I didn't have a specific title, but it's focused on Isaiah 46, 9 through 10, and many other verses where God declares the end from the beginning and from ancient times, things that have not yet been done. And I'm not going to, there's hundreds of fulfilled prophecies in the Bible. I'm not going to cover all of it. But I want to focus in on two in particular, where people were named specifically by name, long before they were even born, that fulfilled certain things. But I want to start off, oh, by the way, I want to do a shout out to my friend Ben Jackson out in Long Beach, California. I'm glad he made it, finally tuned in, man. I met Ben at the Feast 2008, so I'm glad he finally got in on the online. So that's great. Glad to hear that. But I want to start off with Isaiah 41, starting in verse 21. Present your case, says the Lord. Bring forth your strong reasons, says the King of Jacob. Let them bring forth and show us what will happen. Let them show the former things that they were, that we may consider them and know the latter end of them, or declare to us the things to come. Show the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know that you are gods. Yes, do good or evil, that we may be dismayed and see it together. Indeed, you are nothing, and your work is nothing. While he's challenging the pagan gods, which are demons, and God could do things that the demons can't do. Now let's move forward to Isaiah 46, 9 and 10. That's what I just quoted. Remember the former things of old, for I am God and there is no other. And I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand and I will do my pleasure. All right, now let's get into some of the specifics here. Well, let's start off. Well, let's go to Acts 17:26 on this. Well, I should have marked it. Just be patient here. All right. All right, Acts 17:26. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord and hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. Now, the point here that I want to make is their pre-appointed times. Now, we know from Daniel 2, let's go to Daniel 2. There's a great example of where he pre-appointed the times of various nations. Now, there's that image of the gold head with the silver chest, the bronze middle, and the iron legs. Now, we know what that means from a long time ago. It was the gold head was Babylon, the silver chest was Persia, the bronze waist was Greece, and the iron legs is Rome. And that's the chronological prophecy, and these were pre-appointed times. Now, the king of Babylon went from about 606 BC until it was conquered by the Persians in 558. They lasted until 330 BC, and then it was conquered by Greece by Alexander the Great in 333 BC. And that lasted until 31 BC when the Romans took over that entire region, and they lasted until 476 AD. That was the fulfillment of that. Now, those are pre-appointed times. And these dates were not specifically given, but I think we can all agree that that is what Daniel 2 is talking about, that was fulfilled precisely. The historians will not admit that these prophecies were made when they were, which was in the early 6th century BC. Now, Daniel is full of fulfilled prophecies. Most of Daniel has already been fulfilled. And that's just one example. I'm not going to go over all of Daniel. We don't have time for all that. Daniel's prophecies are all chronological. They start off at his time and end up at the end time. Now, the scholars, the professors that I studied under in college, I took 5 Bible classes at the University of Minnesota. They're going to tell you, I'll tell you what they told me. Well, they said the book of Daniel was written about 2,000 years ago. They don't believe that it was written in the 6th century BC because they don't want to believe that these prophecies were written beforehand. They can't believe that anybody could predict the future like that. But I think we can all agree it was written about 600 years before they even began, before they were fulfilled completely. Now, like I said, they started off in his time. Then you got to deal with Isaiah, who had similar prophecies. Now let's go to Isaiah 46, like I said. All right. Now, well, actually, no, wait a minute. Let me go to, now let's go to 1 Kings 13:2. I want to go through this chronologically. And I'm
That was 1 Kings?
1 Kings 13:2. I'm going to go to, this is talking about Josiah. This was written about 970 BC. And behold, a man of God went from Judah to Bethel by the word of the Lord, and Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense. Then he cried out against the altar by the word of the Lord and said, O altar, altar, thus says the Lord, behold, a child, Josiah by name, shall be born to the house of David, and on you ye shall sacrifice the priests of the high places who burn incense on you, and men's bones be burned on you. And he gave a sign in the same day, saying, this is the sign which the Lord has spoken. Surely the altar shall be split apart, and the ashes shall be poured out. Now this is shortly after the kingdom had split between north and south. Jeroboam was the king of the north, and this prophecy was, the name of the prophet is not named, unfortunately. But sure enough, it was fulfilled. That now we got to go to 2 Kings 23:25. All right, here we go. Now before him, now let's talk about Josiah. Now before him there was no king like him. Wait a minute. All right, I'm going ahead of myself. Oh, great. Okay, well, okay. Josiah fulfilled all this. Okay, now let's go back to verse 24. Moreover, Josiah put away those who consulted mediums and spiritists and household gods and idols and all the abominations that were in the land of Judah and in Jerusalem, and he might perform the words of the law which were written in the book that Hilkiah the priest found in the house of the Lord. Now before him there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses. After him, any arrived like him.
Does that include Solomon and David?
I couldn't hear that. What was that?
Does that include Solomon and David?
Yes, it does.
Wow.
He was the greatest king that Israel ever had. He was greater than Hezekiah. He was greater than David. There were really only 3 truly righteous kings in the whole history of Israel, and he was the most righteous. There were 3 others that were fairly righteous. There was Asa, there was Jehoshaphat, and Uzziah in the southern kingdom. But they were not in Josiah's league. He was the greatest king that they ever had, and he was prophesied to be born more than 300 years before the fact. That prophecy in 1 Kings 13:2 was from 960 BC. Josiah reigned around 642 to 611 BC. Now those dates can be disputed, but those are the dates that are in Halley's handbook. Now there's a lot of prophecies about what God is going to do, and of course we know that God knows what he's going to do ahead of time, but now we're going beyond that. In this case, he knows what people are going to do, people with free will, people that are very fallible, people that can be victims of time and chance. And yet, he knew more than 300 years before Josiah was born who he was going to be, what he was going to do, what kind of man he was going to be. Now, this opens up the door to a lot of other questions. Like, what does he really know about people beforehand? And I'm going to get to that later, but now I want to move on to another interesting prophecy in Isaiah 45. All right. Now this is interesting because in this case he names another human being directly by name, says what he's going to do, doesn't say when, but it says, and I'll start at verse 27, Isaiah 44. Who says to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up the rivers? Who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall perform all my pleasure? He's even saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple your foundation shall be laid. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him, and to loose the armor of kings, to open before him the double doors, so that the gates will not be shut. I will go before you and make your crooked places straight. I will break into pieces the gates of bronze, cut the bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness and the hidden riches of secret, that you may know that I, the Lord, who called you by your name, am the God of Israel. For Jacob my servant's sake, and Israel my elect, I have called you by your name. I have named you, though you have not known me. I am the Lord, and there is no other, and no God besides me. I will gird you, though you have not known me. Now, twice Cyrus is named in here by name. Now, the critics are going to say this was added in after the fact because this has clearly been fulfilled. Cyrus was the king of Persia. He conquered Babylon, supposedly in, was it 539 BC? Now, my friend Don Roth might have an earlier date for that. I'm not sure. But the point is, this was more than 150, maybe 200 years before Isaiah wrote this. Isaiah prophesied from the 740s to 698 BC, or thereabout. And yet he's naming Cyrus by name. Very interesting. And the critics are going to say, well, there's two Isaiahs, and this was added in much later, after the fact. And that's what we're going to tell you. They're going to tell you about the book of Daniel. Well, if you're just going to assume that the Bible is wrong, well, then I guess that's what you're going to have to believe. But there's no evidence to support that. And then you got another problem, because all the prophets, except for possibly Jonah, specifically said that Israel would be overrun by its enemies. And sure enough, that's what happened. And you can't say that these prophets wrote that after the fact, because it happened beforehand. There's no way around it. Declaring the end from the beginning. Now, these are two clear cases where he actually did that. Now, let's look. Are there any comments so far? Wait a minute. I'm going to go to...
If you're on the phone, I believe it's *6. We'll unmute your phone. And if you don't have a microphone, I see, looks like Ben doesn't have a microphone.
All
You
right.
can type in the chat room. I have the chat room open. We can see what you're typing.
All right. Now, I forgot to write down. Where was Cyrus's decree? That's in 2 Chronicles. All right. But Cyrus, not only...
It's in chapter 36, I believe,
Right. I forget.
at the end of 2 Chronicles 36. which also repeats itself in, I think, the first chapter of Ezra,
Mhm.
kind of almost verbatim.
Right. Okay. Now we'll start in verse 22. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, the word of the Lord spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah the prophet might be fulfilled. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, the king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it into writing, saying, "Thus says Cyrus, the king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth are the Lord God of heaven has given me, and he has commanded me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah, where who among you, of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him and let him go up." Now, this is what he was saying. He'd given the order to restore Jerusalem. Now, I'm going to have to ask Don, if you can, to give me the date on that, because I think it was later than what the experts claim. But sure enough, he gave that proclamation, and 42,360 people that were in captivity in Babylon, they answered the call and they went there and they rebuilt the temple. And among them was Zerubbabel, there was Zechariah and Haggai, and apparently Malachi and Ezra and Nehemiah. They were among that group. They didn't all go at the same time. And sure enough, he did that. Now there is an interesting comparison that was made to this by Benjamin Netanyahu this last December. And he's referring to the Jerusalem Embassy Act of 1995. Now, you can interpret this however you want to do this, but I thought this was kind of interesting because there was a press conference in Jerusalem with Donald Trump there meeting with Netanyahu, and he didn't say Trump was Cyrus, but he compared him to Cyrus, and I thought that was an interesting comparison. Now, the Jerusalem Embassy Act was passed by Congress on October 23rd, 1995, and it specifically said that the embassy was supposed to be moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That was during the Clinton administration. Now, if you get more than a 2/3 majority vote in Congress, that doesn't have to be signed by the president. Bill Clinton did not sign that law. He did not want to, and in fact, he held it up as long as he could because he kept putting on. There was a law that said you could put a 6-month waiver on it repeatedly. And he did that as long as he was president. And that went on all the way into the Trump administration. Now, this was supposed to take effect on November 8th, 1995. But it didn't. And Trump imposed another 6-month waiver on June 17th, 2017. It was early June 2017. But then, on December 6th, 2017, he finally relented. And he recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And he cleared the waiver. And that's when he had that press conference with Netanyahu, and it was on February 23rd, 2018. Trump announced the embassy move, and it was made official on May 14th, 2018. Now, it was supposed to be done 20 years ago, almost to the day. It was supposed to be done on May 31st, 1999. It was supposed to be done 20 years ago exactly to this day. But it was delayed by 2 decades. Now, what is the significance of it? I'm not really sure. But the Palestinians obviously were irate about it. There were a lot of riots over it, and there were only a couple of countries that backed us up on this whole move. The Australians were one. I don't remember who the other one was. But we weren't getting a lot of support. But this is a case where I think there is a parallel between Donald Trump and Cyrus. Now, like it says, Cyrus did not really know God. He was actually a pagan, and he honored the Persian gods, but he did allow religious freedom among all the subjects, which the Babylonians did not do. But he made a smart move, and he said, you can worship freely. Of course, they were still subjects. They had to pay tribute, and the Romans operated like that too. And it was a smart move on his part. Cyrus was a very competent and very respected leader to this day. Now, are there any comments so far?
You want that picture? Or?
Yeah, I want to do that. Show the picture of Allenby.
Mark, this is Al.
Yeah.
I'm just going to make one little comment, and that is what you quoted over in Isaiah 45, verse 1. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held to subdue nations. So it's kind of odd that, he was, what you said, a pagan leader among pagan people, but yet he's referred to as one who is the anointed.
Yeah.
His anointed. So maybe that's symbolic language for one who is directly involved in restoration. Because we know that ultimately the anointed one is the one who completely brings full restoration. But it's just a little bit odd that he's referred to as his anointed to Cyrus. Small point. Go ahead.
Well,
Sharing that picture.
he obviously worked through Cyrus to accomplish his goal. Doesn't mean that Cyrus was doesn't mean he's going to be in the first resurrection or anything like that. But he'll work with whoever he wants to accomplish his will, and that's another case of that. Now I want to move to.
And who's this?
All right, now the picture on the screen was taken December 11th, 1917. The man at the forefront there is General Edmund Allenby, walking into the streets of Jerusalem. The British drove the Ottoman Turks out of the Middle East. That was part of the Ottoman Empire at that time. The map of Europe and the Middle East was much different, and the map of Africa was much different before the First World War. It changed drastically. And Americans were not sent to the Middle East, but the British did have interest there, and they fought there. And they took 18,000 casualties in late 1917 to take Jerusalem. And they were led by General Allenby. But before I talk more about that, I want to talk about Haggai 2. Yeah, starting at verse 20. Now, there's different interpretations of this because, okay, wait a minute. Let's start at verse 18. Consider now from this day forward, from the 24th day of the 9th month, from the day that the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid, consider it. Is the seed still in the barn? As yet the vine, the fig tree, the pomegranate, and the olive tree have not yet yielded fruit, but from this day forward I will bless you. And again the word of the Lord came to Haggai on the 24th day of the month, from the 9th month. Speak to Zerubbabel, the governor of Judah, saying, I will shake heaven and earth. I will overthrow the throne of the kingdoms. I will destroy the strength of the Gentile kingdoms and overthrow the chariots and those who ride in them. The horses and the riders shall come down, every one by the sword of his brother. In that day, saith the Lord of hosts, I will take you, Zerubbabel, my servant, the son of Shealtiel, says the Lord, and I will make you as a signet ring, for I have chosen you, says the Lord of hosts. Now, 24th day of the 9th month of the Hebrew calendar translates into, apparently, December 6th. Now, according to Halley's handbook, this occurred 520 BC. Now, I'm going to have to ask Don Roth if he's got another date in mind. I'm just going by what it says in Allen's handbook on that. But that would have made it 537 years before this apparently was fulfilled. Now, it wasn't 2,520 years, like Armstrong thought that that Allenby fulfilled Leviticus 26, 2,520 years from 604 BC, which is when he said that the Babylonians conquered the southern kingdom of Judah. Now, that's kind of an early date. Now, I don't think there's no mention here in Zechariah of Jerusalem. There's no mention of the Babylonians or Nebuchadnezzar. And I don't think that it's based on 604 BC. However, it does say the 24th month, or no, it does say the 24th day of the 9th month, which would have been December 6th. So I'm wondering what the connection here is with General Allenby from 1917, which I think is a very, very significant date. And I think that is the real date of the restoration of at least the kingdom of Judah, if not Israel. Now I know that May 18th, 1948 is considered to be the official birth date of Israel. But I think that December 6, 1917 is actually more significant. Now I'm going to ask you if you think there's a connection between between Haggai 2 and what happened in Israel in December 1917. Now, it's something that I don't really have an answer to, but it's something that I'm just throwing up for grabs here. Don, I'm asking you.
Well, he's got to bring up his calendar generator,
Okay.
and then he's got to unmute his mic.
Okay, I guess to simplify things or to make them more understanding, first of all, the dates, whenever you start with 600 BC for the Babylonian or the conquering of Israel, that's a physical impossibility. If you believe what Daniel 9 says, because Daniel 9 spells out a specific number of years, and to the crucifixion of Christ. I mean, all you have to do is look at that. It's 483 years is the amount of time, because you have 69 sevens, and that would come to 483 years. And if you back that whole thing up, and there's another important date in Daniel 9, the very first verse 1 and 2 of Daniel 9. Oh, I should really go there. I wasn't planning on doing this, but and it's really critical that you understand this, is if you're going to understand Daniel 9. That's the important thing, which you'll see this is in the first year of Darius, the son of Azarias, of the lineage of the Medes, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books the number of years specified by the word of the Lord given through Jeremiah the prophet. You can check on that he would accomplish 70 years in desolation of Jerusalem. So this is the first piece of information that you have to understand, is that Jerusalem will lay in desolation for 70 years. And then if you go into verse 24, where it talks about the 70 weeks prophecy, what you have to recognize is the statement right here in verse 25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah, the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The streets shall be built again and the wall. So they're talking about the building of Jerusalem here. They're not talking about the temple, which was what you were talking about. The temple comes later. But first is the restoration of Jerusalem. And so you can see that that's what it's talking about. And then even in troublesome times. And after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off. So you have to take the 7 weeks and the 62, which would be 69 weeks. And if you multiply 69 weeks out, you get 483 years. Now that 483 years, you have to start from the building of the temple. I mean, not the temple, but the rebuilding of Jerusalem. And so to the death of the Messiah. We know that the death of the Messiah was 30 AD, right? Everyone agrees with that?
Yes.
Okay. So you take 30, you got 453 years. Automatically, you're going to be in 453 BC, right? Or
All right.
that is where you would automatically come to the point, and that would not include the 70 years. See? So then you take 483 and you add the 70, you come to 522. That is the date for the restoration. All of the so-called experts, now this is just purely mathematics. I mean, it's not, there's no fudging here. There's no all you're doing is adding up what the Bible says. And so you get to 522 BC, and that was the destruction of Jerusalem and also the destruction of Solomon's temple, which was done, they were both occurred at the same time, but they weren't rebuilt at the same time. Jerusalem was restored first. And so this just gives you an idea. And so if you back up, actually, if you went to the website and biblicalcalendarproof.com and look for the timeline, I lay out everything accordingly to the timeline. And you can see let me see. Oh yes, I gotta get Josiah's reign. Well, when do you think Josiah's reign ended? Josiah was killed in battle by Necho, Pharaoh of Egypt, in 445 BC. Now, how did I get to that date? Well, all you have to do is you have Zedekiah, 11 years. And Jehoiakim, he had, I think, 9 years or something like this. And it's all here, I just have to add it up. It's just mathematics. There's no puzzling piece of information here. It's just a matter of adding up years, and this is what you would come to. So,
Mr.
I hear...
years.
Someone wanted to say something?
Okay, if you're on the telephone and you're not going to speak, please hit *6. That'll mute your phone so we don't hear you talking.
Okay, now if there's any comment about this, I'm all ears and willing to listen.
Okay. Mr. Roth, what was that website again for your calendar generator?
Biblicalcalendarproof.com.
Biblicalcalendarproof.com.
Right.
If anyone wants to write that down and refer to it later. Or if you're listening to the recording that we're making, you can pause it, go back, and write
But
it.
you can see that the prophecy of Daniel, if you just read it out, but you have to take into consideration the 70 years. If you do that and you start at 30 AD, you come to 522. That's more than a lot of, I mean, a lot of times I listen to ministers on TV and that for different reasons, and they all say exactly what you said about, well, we have the destruction of Jerusalem at 585 or 586 or 587. They're not absolute. I can tell you, I'm absolute with this figure. It is, there isn't any play there. In other words, it's when it is when it is, because the years just add up, and this is what it does. This is where it comes out to.
Well, I got to ask you about the reign of Josiah. The dates that I'm familiar with are 642 to 611, and that's 166 years earlier than what you're saying. Is that right?
Josiah, I can tell you. Well, think about this. If the temple was destroyed, and I took the years, right, from the crucifixion, and I took the years out of Daniel, right?
Yeah.
Put them in, added the 70 years, we got to the destruction of the temple. The destruction of the temple occurred after Zedekiah was overcome by Nebuchadnezzar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and he reigned 11 years. I gotta bring that up. He reigned 11 years, and so if we look at that, and we had Jehoiakim. Actually, Jehoiakim, he reigned for about 3 months. That's all, you know. And then before him, Jehoiakim, who his reign was in the 8th year. Let's see, his reign was from 534, and he started. Josiah was killed in 545. So there was another king in there, Jehoaz. He reigned 3 months, and then Jehoiakim took over. So you can see that it's all just a matter of numbers. The numbers come right out of the Bible, and if you take the numbers, you add them up, that it has to come out to that. It's right. It's really quite straightforward.
All right, I thought it was 445, not 545, but that's better.
Yes.
But yeah, 545. Yeah, I think you're right. And if you're basing it on 30 AD, I think that's a very good jumping off point.
Right.
Reliable.
Right. 30 AD has to be the year of the crucifixion. Couldn't be 31 AD.
Yeah.
It has to be 30 AD because of the Passover.
Right.
On the 14th.
Well, you were saying that the Passover of 31 was on a Monday, right?
Yes.
Okay. The Passover of 30 was on a Thursday. All right, good.
Passover of 30 was on a Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday.
Oh, okay.
The first day of unleavened bread was on a Thursday. Okay. There's a difference.
Okay.
All right. Okay.
But it would have started on a Wednesday night, right?
Well, it would have started. God's calendar starts at sunset.
Right.
It's always the day before. So it would have started on a Tuesday night, what we would call Tuesday night.
Okay.
See, because we change the clock at midnight. God's clock changes at sunset. It's just the way it is. And that's why it's, whenever you're talking Gregorian calendar, you have to be really very careful, because not only do you have this problem, but you have the year problem, because the Gregorian calendar year changes in January and God's calendar changes in the spring. So you have this little piece of 3 months, 2 or 3 months in there where you have conflicting years by 1 year. You see what I'm saying there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I was counting on you. I'm glad you tuned in.
Okay, well.
All right. And then I forgot to mention another thing about Cyrus. Says that he dried up the river. And, well, supposedly it was at 539. What happened was, when Cyrus conquered Babylon, what he did was he dug a channel and diverted the Euphrates River around the city of Babylon. Dried up the river, not completely. And of course, it was a walled city. So how do you get over those walls? They didn't go over the walls. They didn't go through the walls. What they did was they went underneath the walls. They waded down. They went through the river because they had a tunnel under the city walls where the river went under it. And the soldiers, the Persian soldiers, went through that tunnel. They dried up the river and walked through that tunnel where the Euphrates River was, and even that was already prophesied more than 150, maybe 200 years before it actually happened. So there's another thing that I think is pretty amazing, and I forgot to mention that. Now I think I'd like to go to Jeremiah 1:5, and like I say, these are people that, I mean, like I said, God knows what he's going to do. He knows what the Messiah is going to do. And then the Messianic prophecies are one thing. But these are prophecies about people that they're flawed, they're subject to free will, and so on. And yet he knew well ahead of time, before they were born, he knew their name. He knew what kind of people they were going to be and what they were going to do. Now, how did he know? I don't know. But now let's look at Jeremiah 1:5. Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you and ordained you to be a prophet to the nations. And I've seen this on anti-abortion bumper stickers over the years, and this is one heavy-duty verse. How did he know that? Now you could say, well, that's Jeremiah, and we're not Jeremiah. We don't have the kind of commission that he did. But I think that this applies to every one of God's people. I really do. Now, in Proverbs 16, verse 9, it says, a righteous man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. Doesn't say that he does that for everybody. But we know that whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. That's Hebrews 12, verses 5 and 6. He doesn't do that. Everyone. He scourges the people that he has called. And he directs their steps. And he molds them. And that's why God's people will succeed. Because he directs their steps and he scourges us. And if he doesn't do that, that means he's just not one of his people. And that's why bad people are the way that they are, because they're not scourged. They're not chastised. But now, according to Josephus, in the case of Cyrus, Cyrus actually read this prophecy in Isaiah 44 and 45 and 46. And he understood that was about him. And he got it. And maybe the Lord gave him the idea to divert that river. It specifically says that he would do that. Now, I'm speculating on that, but I think that's what happened. Now, let's go to Acts 9. This is about Paul, the apostle. Here's another interesting story. God knew what Paul was going to be like beforehand. Now let's start in verse 10. All right, now there was a certain disciple at Damascus. Now Paul was on his way to Damascus. And he was there because he had found out there were Christians there and he wanted to hunt them down. He was the leading enemy of the church at that time. Now there was a certain disciple at Damascus named Ananias. And to him the Lord said in a vision, Ananias. And he just said, Here I am, Lord. So the Lord said to him, Arise and go to the street called Straight and inquire at the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus. For behold, he is praying. And in a vision he has seen a man named Ananias coming and putting his hand upon him so that he might receive his sight. He was already struck down blind at that time. Then Ananias answered and said, Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priest to bind all who call upon your name. But the Lord said to him, Go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine, to bear my name before the Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel. And I will show him how many things he must suffer for my name's sake. Now at that time, Paul was the leading enemy of the church. He was very destructive. But God had already decided, even at that time, what he was going to do with Paul. He would be a chosen vessel and he would accomplish amazing things. In fact, Paul, I think, was the most productive and the most prolific of all the apostles. Paul wrote half of the New Testament, but God already knew. Even while he was an enemy of the church, he was an enemy of God, that God would turn him around and make him a productive servant. Now, how did he know that? I don't know. It's something to think about. Now God chastened him and he struck him blind. That was part of the process. But that doesn't just because he chastened him doesn't necessarily mean that he would respond to it. But in Paul's case, he did. But God knew, even when Paul was on the wrong track, when he was persecuting the church, God already knew that he would accomplish amazing things. He knew in detail what Paul would accomplish ahead of time. Now, let's look at Romans 8:29 and 30. Now, this pertains to the word predestined, which Paul used 4 times. And I think that is correctly translated. It's in Romans 8:29. It's also in Ephesians 5, and it's in Ephesians 11. We'll start off with Romans 8:29. All right. For whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren, whom he foreknew, kind of like Jeremiah 1:5. Knew you before you were even born. And you just got to think about that. Where were you before you were born? What were you like before you were born? You don't know. But he knew, some way, somehow. Now, how did he know that? Well, I suppose if he told us, he would have to kill us. So he's not going to tell us, right? Now, it says the same kind of thing in Ephesians 1:5 and 11. I'm not going to go there. You can turn there if you want. Now, I think I'm going to go Deuteronomy 30, verse 19. All right. I call heaven and earth as a witness today against you that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life, that both you and your descendants may live. And that is correctly translated. There's a choice. The word choice is not used a whole lot in the Bible, but this is one of those cases. There's choices to be made. Our life is a series of choices. And we've all made the wrong choices at various times. And yet, like I said, we have choices to make. But when we make the wrong choice, we're going to be chastened. And he's going to put us back in the right track one way or another. Now, I think I'm going to finish off with Revelation 17, which is similar. Now, all right, this is in verse 8. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and yet not, and is not and yet is. All right, when was your name written in the book of life? When were you called? You were called from the foundation of the world. Your name was written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. Now, when was it? I don't know, but it was before we were all born, long, long before that. And like I said, we have choices to make, but the Lord directs our steps. And it specifically says right here that our names were written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, before we were born. And that's about all I had tonight. Any comments?
Let me see. Am I on? Yes. Yeah.
Yes, you are on. We hear you.
Okay. If we look, there's a couple of things that we have that I think you would help in clarifying this. First of all, in Matthew 10, he talks about that every hair on your head is numbered. Well, for when this was written, that's a pretty fantastic understanding that the reality is he knows every cell in our body. That's the bottom line, really. And he has a record of every cell in everyone who's ever lived. That should be clear, because he's going to resurrect us, right? Not just us, but he's going to resurrect everyone. Ultimately, everyone's going to be resurrected. And so in order to do that, he has to have a record of every single individual and what they're made of. And the other thing is our experiences. We don't lose our experiences. And so that's one point. Then another point is in Matthew 7. It says, "Enter the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, there are few who find it." And then we can see in other scriptures where it says, "Many are called, but few are chosen." So think about that. There is something that there's a decision that those who are called must make to become one of the chosen. I don't know. This might help you to understand what is going on here.
Well, I don't think there's any confusion as to what's going on per se. It's interesting you bring that up, Don. We've talked many times about how the human body is like a computer, and that the brain is a hard drive, and that basically when you die, people talk about an immortal soul. There really isn't one. It's just this hard drive is no longer collecting information. The data is still there. And that's what, like you said, that's what God collects so that he can recreate it later, and the predestination thing's always bothered me because it's just basically saying you don't really have a choice, but we do. We have the choice to answer the call or not to answer the call. And if we answer the call and we're successful, I like to think of it as we're going to get an upgrade. We'll get a whole new chassis, a faster hard drive, faster processor. I like the wings of eagles thing. Running without tiring. Maybe it's a crazy supercomputer type analogy, but yeah. God's the Wi-Fi. You can either tune into his signal or you can tune into the other signal. There's so many good analogies that we can use in this day and age to maybe come closer to describing what's going to happen. Whereas, the disciples back then really didn't have a whole lot at their disposal. So when we're reading through the New Testament and we're thinking, oh, hey, yeah, that the human brain's a hard drive, and the spirit is like Wi-Fi, or it's like the electric power that goes through the cord to the computer or something like that. They didn't have that way to describe it. So they did the best that they could with the tools they had and the language that they had, and so on and so forth. I'm not saying what we're describing is any better, because no eye has seen nor ear nor has heard what God has truly in store for those who love Him. We can guess, but ultimately, as long as we're not so invested in a theory, and we're willing to be open-minded, I think we can get along and not argue about things that don't really matter. Because obviously what's important in the long run is that we have a relationship with each other and with God and His Son. And those are some of the keys that are going to really come into play, in the kingdom. So we're going to have to be able to use those skills, those experiences that we learn, all the things that He puts in our path while we're human beings. I stopped praying for patience because I had so many things set in my way. No sense in praying for simpler trials. He knows what you need. He's going to equip you. In the long run, I guess maybe we are predestined if we choose Him, for lack of a better way to describe it. And that's all I got. Sorry.
I did have a couple more verses I wanted to mention. Jude verse 4, for certain men have crept in unnoticed, who long ago were marked out for this condemnation, ungodly men who turn the grace of God into licentiousness and deny the only Lord God and the Lord Jesus Christ. Long ago marked out. I don't know.
Well, they serve a purpose.
Yeah.
And I think that when we look at and confirm information from the Bible, that what that is doing is increasing your faith. When you look at, like I went through Daniel 9, right? And it's an absolute. There, it's like black and white, you might say, or it's just a matter of adding up what is in your Bible. That's what it says in your Bible. We know these dates, and so therefore this in effect confirms what the prophecy says. So it increases our faith to know that when we read something in our Bible, that in fact it is fact. It's based on a written promise. Our faith is not something that is well, I hope it happens. I have faith that it's going to happen. No, I have a written promise from the Creator. It's right here. That's what this is. And that's what faith is.
Right.
So maybe that helps a little bit. I don't know.
I did have one more verse that I wanted to finish off with. Ecclesiastes 9:11. I memorized it a long time ago. The race is not always to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, but time and chance happen to them all. Well, not everything is predetermined. Yes, we can be victims of circumstance, and you can be in the right place, the right time, wrong place, the wrong time, and so on. But whatever does happen, God will still carry out his ultimate will. He doesn't predetermine every little thing, but he will carry out his will one way or another. That's my conclusion.
Yeah, you're right about that. This is Al. Whatever happens to you through time and chance, it is not without his approval. I think that's one way I like to say it, is whatever does happen, there's nothing that happens without his approval, whether good or evil. What I mean by the word approval is he doesn't put his hand down and stop it from happening. So it's like whatever occurs in your life, both positive and negative, if he doesn't prevent it from happening, then it is, in a sense, with his approval that it happens.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you have the whole book of Job that completely proves your point, Al.
Oh, yeah. Right. But I think there's another verse I'd like to add to your list, Mark, and that is Psalm 139. I would start it somewhere around 13 and go through 16. For you have formed my inward parts, and you have covered me and woven me and knit me together in my mother's womb. Kind of like Jeremiah. And I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works. So what works is he talking about here? The works of the creation of a human being still in the womb. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, and when I was skillfully wrought in the lowest part of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed. And in your book, they all were written. The days that were appointed, or this King James is fashioned, for me, when as yet there were not yet any of them. So it's kind of like you get a sense of predestination a little bit there when he says your days were already determined when none of them were yet made. So it's kind of fits in a little bit with what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And it really goes back to the old the predestination thing goes back to a long time ago when Calvinism came into full swing, and it was against the Arminianists, and that debate went raging on for centuries, as you already know, and people have gone back and forth with it because they both seem to fit at different times, right? You did not get into the thing about Pharaoh and how he was a vessel of destruction. He didn't come out of the womb making a decision to be a vessel of destruction. He came out of the womb in circumstances in Egypt, and he lived his life and ended up being the Pharaoh. He didn't say, let me be a vessel of destruction, but that's what he was made to be, right? I think you even see that in Romans chapter 9 there, where he has a little discussion on that. Shall the thing formed say to him who formed it, what do you think you're doing? How dare you form me this way? Kind of,
That's an
hey, some vessels are made for destruction.
Right.
And you, on the other hand, were not made for destruction. You were made to be glorified.
Right.
You're a vessel of
Some
honor.
made for honor, some for dishonor.
Yes.
And I'm not saying I got these verses don't all appear to be consistent, because something, okay, like I said, God knows what he's going to do, but now we have these examples of Josiah and Cyrus. God knew what it was going to be like ahead of time. He declared the end from the beginning. How did he know what these people were going to be like? How did he know what they were going to do? I don't know how he knew, but he did.
Well, because he will orchestrate their lives and all the events of their lives, carefully orchestrate it so that they become the vessel that he needs to fulfill the prophecy. Now, not every individual born out on some prairie somewhere in the outback or up in the North Woods somewhere is necessarily appointed to be a pivotal character in prophecy. But some people are born for that. And I believe that those who are born for that purpose, let's say the man of sin from the Second Thessalonians, or the beast and the false prophet, all these things that come about that are for specific individuals to fulfill have to be orchestrated for prophecy to be precisely fulfilled in their times, exactly as they're supposed to. Even like John the Baptist, right? I will send Elijah the prophet. He had to be born at that time to pave the way to introduce Messiah. So that individual, John the Baptist, had to be brought up and orchestrated in such a way to fulfill that role. But not every person is.
Right.
So how does he do his work? Here's the thing. How does he do his work? I don't know, and neither do you. All we can do is look at it and appreciate it and love the fact that he knows what he's doing and trust him. That's the way I look at it.
Well, and I was just going to add to that, Al, taking it a step further, we heard a message once given by a friend of ours about pawns and kings. And the thing is, God doesn't really reveal who the pawns and kings are, so you're supposed to basically go through life treating everybody like a king, because you don't know. You don't know what their ultimate destiny or purpose is. And if you go around with a high and mighty attitude and saying, well, this person, the reason why they have hard times is because they're a pawn and they deserve it. No, that's not it. I mean, the whole reason that message was given is the gentleman's nephew was killed on the way to the feast. And so, he was wrestling with the whole time and chance and the whole destiny and predestination, I should say. And he just came to the conclusion that, sometimes there are people, God moves pieces on the chessboard in such a way to serve his purpose. It's not up to us to question the movements. It's not up to us to question who is what piece and what their purpose is. It's just, he was just trying to say that the safest way to approach this was to assume that everyone was, a king on the board, even though that isn't likely, but it would be the safest way. Because then, no one thinks they're greater than somebody else.
The one thing I've found over the years, this is Don here, we off to the side. When God makes a move or something's going to happen, he puts all the pieces in position. I could call him the master playwright. Before, your curtain's about to go down and come back up, everyone's ready for their part. They may not know they're ready for their part, but he's got it all laid out ahead of time. Every single time the church falls apart or this goes wrong or that goes wrong, all of a sudden there's a leader in place, there's a way to go, people are coming together, and the church has direction. It happens every single time. And if they're scattered, even in the smaller groups, there's always a leader. There's always somebody. and as for, he knows what he's doing. He also knows what's going to happen, and he knows the options. So he definitely, and as for predestination or knowing what a person's going to do, it's genetics. Your genetics is something that's truly fantastic, and you can have mean people meeting with mean people who marry mean people, and then all of a sudden out pops the most friendliest, nicest person. Why? Because the fourth chromosome of the fourth chromosome of the fourth chromosome of the fourth set came together into the 16th square. Bang, there they are. God knows that. He knows how to put it all together. He knows what people to bring where. And he may be working generations ahead to make it happen, or to make the possibility of it happening available. It's incredible what he can do and what he does.
I think that you have to look at the story of Jonah. When God gives a job to someone, he's going to make sure that that person carries it out, even if it requires a lot of stress on the person.
That's a good point.
But whether they want to or not.
Yeah.
And whether they do it with a good attitude or a bad attitude. You know, he was a little bit upset when they repented.
Well, I think I also forgot to mention John 15:16. You did not choose me, I chose you. That you may bear fruit and then your fruit should remain. People think it's the other way around. They think they want, well, we do make choices in life, but we did not call ourselves. It was God that called us. It was God that called the apostles. It wasn't their choice. But he called them, and they succeeded and they bore fruit. And he knew that ahead of time. And that, as far as these Calvinists that believed in predestination, well, they had a warped view of it, because the people that believed in this stuff, they always thought they were predestined to succeed. Then they had other people that they had written off as losers, and that they thought that they were predestined to fail. But we don't know that. We don't know what God's decisions are, and we can't. He doesn't tell us. He doesn't identify us or put a physical mark on us. And it's not about, money or appearance or any of that stuff. So that's all out the window, but people are trying to use that to identify who is God's people. Well, we can't do that. But he is in control, and he like I said, he chastens his people, and he doesn't chasten the people that are not his people.
Going back to you were talking about the Calvinists who were like, hey, you're it or you're not. It's a good point about, yes, he chastens those whom he loves. It's not fun. But he's shaping us for a purpose. Like you were saying earlier, maybe it was Don, or kind of losing track as to who said what, because I think we're all kind of on the same page. But ultimately, it really and truly was a predestination where we didn't have the ability to choose. Why use the analogy of a race? Finishing the race. We can choose to finish the race or not finish the race. Give up. The other is, he also says, quench not the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So there are certain elements where this isn't easy breezy, guys and gals. Like the Calvinists, it's not like, hey, I'm baptized, I'm in the club, I don't have to do anything else. There's some effort on our part, and again, more choosing. Just throwing that out there.
You have to look at the 7 churches, and what does it say about every single one? He who overcomes. That means something. And when you go right back to the book of Genesis, first chapter, very first chapter, verse 26, let us make man in our image according to our likeness, let them, etc. Those are 2 different things. One regards shape, the other regards character. So he tells us right in the very first chapter of the Bible what he is intending to do. And that is, he's intending to build character within us. That's the really the bottom line for everything that we do and experience. So I guess I'll leave you with that thought.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the 7 churches in Revelation 2 and 3, because there's another case where he knew what these people were going to be like a long time before they were even born. That's another weird one. You just think about that one. Well, that's all we got. I mean, it's already been an hour and 20 minutes. That's relatively brief for me, but that's all I got.
It's all good. Thanks a lot, Mark.
Well, thanks, Mark. Now I got to sit up all night wondering why I'm not a Calvinist.
I'm doing that too.
Because you're a Lutheran.
Oh, man. Oh.
Oh, sorry. Couldn't resist.
Well, as far as trying to figure it out, some time ago I read the last couple verses of Ecclesiastes chapter 8. And it says, no matter what you do, no matter how hard you set yourself to try to figure out the works that God does from the end to the beginning to the end, you will not be able to find out. Even it says that even if a wise man sets himself to do it, he will not be able to do it. So when people come up with these like super complex charts about end time prophecy, and they come up with all these other things that they think they've got it all figured out, I just kind of smile to myself. And if they seem receptive, I'll point to Ecclesiastes 8, the last 2 verses. I'll say, well, I don't think anyone's really going to figure it out.
I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's probably the first time that I've ever heard anyone quote from the book of Ecclesiastes. And I've been thinking about this for a long time. I did a study on Ecclesiastes in February 13th, 2016 over at Geiger's, and I want to do another one because I love that book.
What do you like about it?
People ignore that book. A lot of people don't like it. But one of these days I want to do a study of just the book of Ecclesiastes when you're ready.
Well, I'll make a comment on that, and you can evaluate it. I heard a man talking about the book, and he said, throughout the book where it says under the sun, it's talking about human level understanding. But when it says under heaven, it's talking about when you have revelation from God to understand something. Mm-hmm. So there's those 2 things being addressed in the book, which maybe confuses and throws us off a little, because it is a hard book to try to make it congruent all the way through, to make it consistent and make it sensible, that it all agrees with itself. It's a difficult book to do that with. So he made that point, and I thought about it, and I don't know if I believe it or not, but it is a consideration.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely a very sobering book. It's a book that causes you to reflect on your own limitations, and it helps us to be sobered and to consider our own end, and to think about the more serious side of life.
Yeah, it's a very underrated book. And I remember I took 5 Bible classes in college, and I had a professor that hated that book. He was a Jewish guy, and he thought that doesn't belong in the Bible. It's full of Greek Epicurean philosophy. He didn't think it was written by Solomon. But I love that book. It's got more wisdom than Proverbs does, even though it is kind of sad. But life is pretty sad too, and it's true. Every verse in that book is true, whether you like it or not. But anyway, getting ahead of myself, I want to do that some other time, just something to think about.
Well, a verse that's not exactly in the Bible, it's sort of based on Proverbs 19:21. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. I kind of think that's where that Yiddish or Jewish idiom, men plan and God laughs kind of thing comes from. So that kind of touches a little bit on what you're talking about, Al, with in Ecclesiastes. 'Cause
Yeah.
man makes all these crazy charts and plots all these sort of crazy plans and thinks that he knows this and that, and God just laughs. So,
Well, there's nothing wrong with the curiosity. I mean, we are made to be curious and we want to figure things out. I think
right.
we're supposed to want to figure it out, but we also have to come to finally be at peace with the fact that you can't figure it all out. You can only have bits and pieces.
Right, absolutely, and that's what faith is. Being able to operate on a need-to-know basis. I mean, that's really what the Bible is. It's a need-to-know basis. We don't have all the minuscule details and everything else that even the angels in heaven have no clue. They probably have a little bit better idea than we do, but it's all God's plan. And like I was saying earlier, some people get so invested in some sort of prophecy or some sort of concept and thought, and it just ends up ruining relationships. Because,
it can if they let it happen, if they let it dominate their time and their energy, to the point where other things start to suffer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks
But
again.
thank you, Mark. I appreciate your study, Mark. It was good.
Glad you liked it.